All right, Senator Tom Cotton joins us tonight. Sir, it's good to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Rob. Glad to be on with you.
Yeah, so we're expecting, I think everybody's expecting a pretty serious repudiation of the nonsense we've seen in recent years. Democrats abandoning law and order, fiscal sanity, common sense in pursuit of this virtuous agenda. What do you expect to see next week?
I do think the American people are going to repudiate the Democrats next week. So many families in Arkansas and across the country are struggling to put food on the table, to fill their gas tanks, to pay the rent, pay the electricity bills. Right. And they know that this didn't just happen. It's not an accident. It's not bad luck. This is the direct result of the Democrats' policies. We have inflation because Democrats spent trillions of dollars that we don't have at a time when our economy was already recovering from the pandemic and all the Democratic shutdowns. And, right. Or we have crime in our streets on unprecedented levels because Democrats wanted to defund the police and end the bail system and to let prisoners out of jail. They all know that what they're suffering in their communities is a direct result of Democratic policies.
Yeah, it's pretty clear. I think most voters get that no matter how much they try to obfuscate and lie, basically. I want to talk about big tech for a second. We learned this week, and we covered this a lot last night, that Facebook and Twitter worked in conjunction with Homeland Security to silence social media posts that they deemed to be misinformation, which ironically could include speech such as the origins of COVID that likely is going to end up being true, right? Yeah. The real goal, of course, is silencing dissent. And we learned that the government and big tech kind of work together in that process. And I think it's a huge and explosive story. I think it's horrifying. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think most people remember that, the singing disinformation lady that Joe Biden wanted to put in charge of this. Yeah. Scary Poppins, I guess you might call her.
Jankowicz,
yeah. So even though she's gone, this effort is not gone. It's an effort by the administration and by the progressive left to silence dissent and censor views they don't like. I experienced this myself a couple years ago. I've got a new book out called Only the Strong, where I write about in the earliest days of the pandemic when I was trying to ring the alarm when Democrats were more focused on impeaching Donald Trump. I said, after looking at all the evidence, this probably didn't originate in a food market in Wuhan. If anything, it likely originated in the labs in Wuhan where they are researching coronaviruses. We should at least be asking the question and investigating it. As I explained in Only the Strong, you had Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden screaming that it was nativist and xenophobic and racist, when in reality, most people with common sense and a level head on their shoulders look at the facts now and say it almost certainly came from those labs. But you see it on issue after issue. They talked about also racial justice or the war in Afghanistan or the effectiveness of the vaccine. Right. All issues in which they want to suppress views and debate on the government party line. It shouldn't be allowed in our country. And when we win back the majority in the Congress, I promise you we're going to be digging into it. Yeah,
it's astonishing what they tried to get away with, and the power that they have over big tech is, I think, horrifying. I know you agree with that. Biden recently threatened to punish Saudi Arabia for reducing oil production, which, of course, raises fuel prices as we get into the midterms. We've talked about this extensively on the show here. I see it as, potentially impeachable. I think it's certainly an abuse of power. It's clearly political. He's using the weight of the U.S. government to try and push somebody to do something that's going to politically benefit him. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
It sounds almost like a quid pro quo, which is what Donald Trump was impeached over.
Exactly.
And now remember, though, he didn't ask the Saudis not to reduce production. He only asked them not to reduce production before the election. The simplest answer to this is to simply produce more American oil and gas. We're the world's dominant oil and gas superpower if we would unshackle our energy producers here in America. We should never have to go to dictatorships like Venezuela or Iran for oil. Frankly, we shouldn't even need to go to friendly countries like Saudi Arabia or Canada. We should produce more oil and gas here at home in America.
Don't you think that deserves an investigation, though? I mean, it's pretty clear that he was threatening to pull funding, to pull support for Saudi Arabia in some capacity if they didn't reduce oil in the time before the election. That's pretty clear to me.
To potentially withdraw troops or arms sales. And remember, we have soldiers and we sell weapons to countries around the world, not for their benefit. It does benefit them. We do it for our benefit. And Saudi Arabia has been a partner of the United States going back 80 years, and presidents of both parties have been able to work with them. They, along with countries like the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait and Israel, form a critical part of our networks of friends and partners in the Middle East. I talk about it a little bit about this in my new book, that you have to recognize who your friends are and who your enemies are, even if they may not share your political system or your cultural and social sensibilities. And the fact that Joe Biden can't find a way to get along with Saudi Arabia, the way, say, Ronald Reagan did, when the Saudis kept the price of oil low and it ended up devastating the Soviet-Russian economy, it's just an indictment of his leadership.
We read the report today that the Russians are actually talking about using potentially a nuclear weapon. It's a small one, we don't know. Ukraine has been under a lot of attack, a lot of casualties. Do you see the new Congress, because I know Kevin McCarthy indicated that it's not just going to be an open checkbook to Ukraine. How long do you see this continuing on, the support for Ukraine in this new, probably Republican conservative Congress?
Well, first off, we always have to be mindful of nuclear threats, as we were in the Cold War, as we are today, not just with Russia, but with China. At the same time, we can't let them cower us into submission. You know, we never did that in the Cold War. Ronald Reagan was very aggressive in standing up to Soviet communism in the 1980s. We should be equally strong in defending our interests against China and Russia as well. Just as a matter of fact, we haven't yet seen the Russian military move any of their nuclear weapons, which we monitor very carefully. As far as it goes supporting Ukraine, I believe we'll continue to support Ukraine with the kind of military aid that only the United States can provide. Some of our European partners can provide some military support, but really there's some systems that only America can provide. I think you may see a slight change in the way that aid is assigned, though, between the United States and Europe. Even if European nations can't provide the kind of weapons that Ukraine's soldiers need, they can provide the money that the country needs. So I think most Americans support providing the weapons that the Ukrainian army needs. They wish Europe would carry a little bit more of the load and provide the money that Ukraine needs.
It's astonishing how we always have to carry the load. I think that's what frustrates conservatives the most, is that when you look at who's paying for all this, countries that are right there, countries that are within a quick shot of Russia, don't seem to care as much as we do and don't provide nearly as much as we do. That frustrates Americans. I know it does. You've got the new book. You've mentioned it a couple times, Only the Strong. We got it right here. Reversing the Left's Plot to Sabotage American Power. You explain Democrats have been plotting against America for decades, and it is by design. Go into that a little bit.
Yeah, so most Americans sense that the country has suffered some decline, but it's declined by design. The Democrats, going back 100 years to Woodrow Wilson, the most ideological man to be president, are at best ambivalent about America. When was the last time you saw a Democrat proudly, unapologetically stand up and defend America and say he was proud of our country, as opposed to attack it? So, of course, they're hostile to the sources of American power, a strong military, a growing, prosperous economy, our sovereignty in the world, and our freedom of choice and action when it comes to where we protect our interests and how we protect them, a sovereign border, American energy production. These are all the sources of American power, and Democrats have been intentionally undermining them for decades. Just look what the Biden administration has done to fossil fuel production here in America.
They want to dismantle the country.
It's not an accident that gas costs $5 a gallon. It's not an accident that you have criminals being let out on the street. This is a deliberate policy of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. You know, a lot of people write books and then decide they're going to run for president. I know you're very young. It doesn't have to be now, but do you ever think about it?
Well, thanks for the question, Rob. I appreciate it. I'll focus on this election first. We'll get to the next election. I will say this. Anybody who wants to run for president should probably pick a copy of Only the Strong to learn how to rebuild American power.
Right here, right? There's the book right there. Senator, thank you so much for coming.
All right.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Rob.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.